My name is Jack Hyneman, as you heard. I'm a researcher and educator here locally. And some of the research we do is to look at agriculture and the various forms of agriculture that we have in the world and the choices that are being left to us. Before I say too much, I just want to know how many of you out there think that Monsanto is a monster? Okay, I'm going to stand up for Monsanto here for a minute. I don't think they're the monster. I think they're the symptom of the monster, and I think their product, GM crops, is another symptom of the monster. Thank you. The monster are the powerful economic and legislative forces that are creating an agriculture that a lot of people just don't want anymore. I was part of an international assessment on agriculture, and we were given the task of forecasting 50 years into the future. We were given the task of forecasting 50 years into the future to determine what kind of agriculture would feed the world well and sustainably when the population on Earth was 9 billion people. The conclusion of that is that the agriculture we are purchasing from companies like Monsanto is not the kind of agriculture that will feed the world. But I'll bet you guys have all heard that we need genetic modification in order to feed the world. Have you heard this? Yes. Well, fortunately, I said before, I'm a lecturer here, and as a lecturer, I have a handicap. I need PowerPoint slides and a high-powered laser, but I can't do that here. So fortunately, my PhD student, Dorian, has volunteered to be my walking chalkboard. We're going to display a little bit of our data for you on this topic. Now let's turn the clock back. Let's go back to 1961. The world in 1961, over 50 years ago. Who was an agricultural powerhouse in 1961? New Zealand was a powerhouse. Who else?
USA.
The USA was a powerhouse. And in fact, what is one of the icon crops that the U.S. produces? Corn. Yes, they make lots of corn. So in 1961, who was the world's best corn maker?
US.
That's right. USA had the highest yield using non-GM corn. 60 years later, who makes more corn per acre? USA or Western Europe that doesn't use GMOs?
Western Europe.
And you're right. Western Europe, no GMOs at all, outproduces per acre the US in corn production. Now you might turn around and say, oh yeah, but they're not doing it sustainably in Western Europe. They're probably using more pesticide than the Americans are using. So let's have a look at pesticide trends. Since the adoption of GMO products in the U.S., herbicide use in the U.S. has been going up. The U.S. now uses more herbicide per acre than it did before it adopted GMOs. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, we're seeing a decrease in herbicide use. Now, it's not spectacular. Herbicide use is kind of a wash, but the point is you don't need GMOs to reduce high external inputs like chemical herbicides. We have heard, though, that a big success of GMOs is the reduction of chemical insecticides. Let's have a look at insecticide use. Since the adoption of BT crops in the U.S., chemical insecticide use has gone down by a small amount, from 600 grams to 500 grams per acre, if you don't count the pesticide the crop is making. But meanwhile, let's have a look at Western Europe, which doesn't use GMOs. They've reduced it 10 times more. Without the use of GMOs, France has gone from 500 grams of chemical insecticide per acre to 60 grams in the same period of time. So the great success story of GM crops, the reduction in insecticide use, turns out to be false. Countries that haven't used GMOs, that are using the best combination of practices, germplasm and management to grow their crops, are reducing inputs like chemical pesticides and not sacrificing yield. Meanwhile, what's happening on the farmer's level? Since we've adopted intellectual property rights instruments like patents and patent-like plant variety rights, farmers have been losing choices in germplasm. They've been buying biotechnology packages. If we look at the U.S. corn options for the American farmer, 10 years ago, the American farmer could choose between some 6,000 different varieties of corn. What? And now, only a few years later, there's 1,000 varieties for them to choose from 6,000 to 1,000, because of a small number of companies, Monsanto, DuPont, that own the corn supply and are reducing the agricultural biodiversity available to the American farmer. But it's not just corn, it's also soybeans. The American soybean farmer used to be able to choose between 3,500 different varieties of soybean. And now, they only have an option of 350 varieties. Now this data comes from Monsanto itself in replying to the U.S. Attorney General about farmer options. In replying to the Attorney General on their options. They have been losing options. And the problem with losing options is that your crop becomes vulnerable to pests and destruction. Now I have a couple of quotes here, and I want you to tell me who said this. The question they were asked was, how vulnerable are our crops? And the answer was, most major crops are impressively uniform genetically and impressively vulnerable. This uniformity derives from powerful economic and legislative forces. Who said that? No, the American National Academies of Sciences in 1970. They were already saying that the U.S. corn, soy, and cotton products were under incredible stress over 40 years ago, and nothing has changed. So the monster are the powerful economic and legislative forces that are controlling our food supply. If we get rid of Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Pioneer will just take over in the vacancy they leave. We must deal with governments that are increasingly attaching our food security to short-term private gain and develop an agricultural system that is sustainable and produces good food for people. Yeah.